bio and then we'll pass it off to you. So thank you so much again. Mr. Revsine has been with the Big Ten Network since its inception in 2007, and he's the host for the network's pregame, halftime, and postgame coverage for the men's basketball and football, including its Emmy award-winning football pregame show. And originally hired from ESPN, where he spent more than a decade as an anchor and play-by-play man, Revsine has reported from numerous Rose Bowls, Final Fours, and national champion footballship games, including the most recent national championship, which I bet was very exciting. So we're so grateful that you could join us today and just really appreciate your time.
Yeah, my pleasure, Sophia. Great to be on with you. And you can call me Dave. So you can
Okay, well, thank you so much. Yes, so Sahil and I are excited to moderate the questions, and if it works for you, we're happy to jump right in.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah,
Okay,
thrilled to be
great.
here and happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we have a list of questions accumulated from all of the different ISBC members. And so one of our first ones is that we understand that you've been with the Big Ten Network, as you mentioned, since its inception. And we're just wondering what that experience has been like, especially witnessing the growth of the conference and the changes in the sports field over the years.
Yeah, it's been an eventful time. I mean, as you said, 2007. So we're creeping up. Next football season will be our 20th football season. Obviously, our 20, the first year year zero is your first season. So our 20th anniversary will be a little over a year from now, but next year will be our 20th season. And it's just kind of crazy to think of everything that's happened in the interim. I mean, when the Big Ten Network started, it was the first of its kind. No one had ever tried to do anything like this. And now you've had several other conferences that have hopped on board. I mean, when I left ESPN to join the Big Ten Network, I think the overwhelming reaction of my colleagues in Connecticut was, "What in the world are you doing? Why would you do this?" It was just such an unproven concept. So that's been part of it. I mean, it's just kind of been a thrill to be on the ground floor of it, to see it succeed in the way that it has, to see it change the face of sports television in a lot of ways, certainly college sports television, and then just the growth of the league. I mean, when we launched the network, we had 11 schools. Now we have 18. It's a coast-to-coast league, so that part of it has been really exciting. And then just all the changes in college athletics. I think all of that is just it makes my mind spin a little bit to think of how different the world is now than it was in 2007.
Absolutely. You mentioned that, a lot of your colleagues at ESPN were, kind of skeptical of why you decided to go to the Big Ten Network. What was kind of behind that decision-making process?
Well, for me, I just believed in the people. I don't think that I had any intention of going to the Big Ten Network either. When I went for the initial interview, I was coming up on a new contract, like my fourth contract at ESPN, and I think you'll see when you get into the business world that sometimes leverage is a good thing. And they had reached out to me, the Big Ten Network had, and said they were interested in talking to me. And I just thought, well, the timing's good to create some leverage for ESPN and maybe get a little bit more of kind of what I wanted on my next deal and that type of thing. And so I really came to Chicago for the interview with virtually no intention of actually taking the job. I just wanted to get an offer of the job. And then, because I didn't know what it was going to be, I think that's a big thing, because there hadn't been anything like this. There was nothing that I could look at and say, well, this will be similar to X. There was no X. So, and then as they started to explain to me what it was going to be, I had this crazy realization, I would say maybe 15 or 20 minutes into the initial conversation with our original executive producer, a fellow by the name of Leon Schweier, who unfortunately has passed away since then. But I kind of realized this might be something that I was interested in. I didn't understand what this was going to be. I didn't know it was going to be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I didn't understand the role that they envisioned for me. And I think as I kind of ruminated on it, or even kind of as my mind was racing early on in this conversation, my thought process changed from, I just want to be offered this job to, hey, maybe this would be a really cool job to do. And then my second interview was with Jim Delaney, who was the commissioner of the Big Ten, and this was really his baby. And then Mark Silverman, who was my original boss, who now is one of the bosses, one of the guys who runs Fox Sports. And that really sealed it for me. I think, kind of to your question of, well, what was it about this that made you think this would be something you'd want to do? It was them. It was understanding their vision for it, knowing how competitive Jim is. I felt like he was going to win, right? Like he knew that this was a model that would work. And so that was probably a huge part of it. I kind of felt like after meeting with Mark and Jim, hey, I'm going where they're going. I want to be a part of this. And I think I had this feeling too that I've only really recently, I think, started to articulate or really wrap my head around, which was I felt like if I didn't take it, I would sit there and look at whoever they ended up hiring and say, that guy's in my seat. Like that should have been me. And so I had assurances from my bosses at ESPN, like, hey, if this doesn't work out, we'll always have a spot for you. That was in a different world of sports television. I'm not sure that's still the case, just because of how that world has changed in ways that we couldn't have foreseen. They've gone through a lot of cutbacks since then, but I felt like I was leaving on great terms, and this was just something I wanted to try.
Yeah, wow. No, that's incredible. And just thinking about the success of the Big Ten going from 10 teams now to 18, as you like continue to think about the future of the Big Ten, do you think it'll continue to like grow and like continue to change and innovate as sports continue to change as well?
Well, I think the one thing that I've learned in this business is never say never. So I certainly have no inside information that the Big Ten is going to expand, or that they're thinking of changing their membership. But I would also just say I would have never in a million years envisioned kind of where we are right now. And the reason that we are where we are is because the landscape has changed and the business has changed. And so, because I can't necessarily foresee, and I don't think many people can foresee where this is going, I think I'm in the mode now where I just take the wait and see approach. I mean, the day that I was told that USC and UCLA were joining, and then they were subsequently joined a year later by Washington, Oregon, and then that expansion all happened at once. But USC and UCLA were announced a year before Washington, Oregon were. The day that I heard that, I mean, my jaw practically hit the ground. I mean, I couldn't believe that was what was going on. I sensed that we were having an expansion. I've been asked to cancel a trip. I had a trip planned with my family, and have been asked by my bosses not to go, and said, we need you in the office tomorrow. We can't tell you why. And then I got there, and that was the news. So I knew something big was happening. I might have told you expansion, but I wouldn't have thought it would be USC and UCLA. And so I think I'm just kind of at a point now where you just don't know. I mean, in hindsight, it makes a lot of sense as they kind of explain, the logic behind it. But if you would have asked me to name 10 schools that morning that might be expansion candidates, I don't think I would have arrived at them.
When you're preparing for a broadcast or, some when it's maybe a new topic, when there's new teams coming into the league, especially like what does that preparation process look like? Just kind of, immersing yourself in the different changes that are happening, and just kind of the overall, knowledge gathering part of preparing for a broadcast.
Right. So, I mean, those broadcasts, those days are very unusual, right? A day like UCLA and USC joining, or Washington, Oregon, made a little more of a sense that might be happening because I've been rumored for a while. But those days are unique, and that's kind of an all hands on deck, and trying to figure out, trying to sort through everything, and what's the significance of this. And we might work some hand in hand with the conference, just in terms of, hey, help us understand kind of what are the points of emphasis that you want to get across on these editions and whatnot. So I'd say that's very different from like doing a basketball game or doing the show I did this morning, or whatever, like a talk show or a halftime show, or doing play-by-play. I did a game Saturday night. Those are very different. So the normal process of just doing a show would be, most of it is accumulated knowledge already. I mean, I follow these teams, and so I kind of know what's going on with them. You might want to brush up on, what happened recently, make sure you're up to date, you've watched the games, that type of thing. Go through stats, any information that might be made available. If I'm doing a play-by-play of a game, I'll go back and watch the last two games that each team has played, just to make sure that I'm fully on board with that. So I'd say there's kind of no hard and fast rule as to how you do broadcast. It kind of depends on what you're working on that day, whether it's more of a run of the mill. This is what I do however many days a year I'm on the air, 250 or whatever would be, somewhere in that neighborhood probably, versus wow, this is a historic day, this is a unique day. Those are different preparations.
Yeah, and like in terms of preparation and thinking back to like undergrad and then also your experiences at ESPN, what would you say has been like the most helpful skill and trait that you've developed that's really been beneficial in terms of like the sports broadcasting space?
Oh man. So I think at ESPN, the big thing that really differentiated me, interestingly enough, was writing. Back in those days, I think it's changed somewhat significantly, but back in those days at ESPN, we wrote all of our own copy. So this was an era where there were only three sports centers a day. There was a sports center that came on at 6 o'clock Eastern. There was one at 11 Eastern, and there was one that started at 2 a.m. Eastern time. And so you would come in, 7 or 8 hours before the show, and you'd write, like there were a lot of, you'd write lead-ins, like your on-camera intros and that kind of stuff. It was a very different show than it is today, because this was back in the day, if you guys can imagine this, before people had cell phones, before they could see all the highlights just, in their Twitter feed or Instagram or whatever, TikTok. And so we were the source for that. And so people would it was appointment television to watch Sports Center to see what happened in sports, because that was the only way that you could see it. And so it's very different. Like the show moved more slowly, and we kind of methodically took you through everything that happened in the day with the thought that you were actually going to sit down and watch the entire hour. It's very different now, obviously, with the way people watch. So I think that writing really differentiated me. I happen to be a good writer, and so I was creative, and I think that is. I was hired for something called ESPN News, which was it was the third domestic network that ESPN launched. So at that point, there had been ESPN and ESPN2. ESPN News was a 24-hour sports news network, and so the idea was at the top of the bottom of the hour, you get a fresh 30 minutes of what was going on in the world of sports. And so I was hired for that with a group of like 14 of us, and we were kind of like in AAA, if you were to use a metaphor of sports, and it was you were hoping to get called up to the big leagues to see whether or not you could be on ESPN or ESPN2, and they kind of used us as a farm team a little bit, and I was able to move up reasonably quickly, and I would say it was probably my writing that differentiated me. In terms of, so yeah, I mean, I guess that's probably the biggest thing that I would say. I think overall, I'm not a formally trained journalist. I don't have a degree in journalism. I have a degree in history. So I think I've kind of, maybe my competitive advantage is I came at it a little bit differently. I'm a storyteller. I love history because I love stories. And so I have always kind of tried to unearth what makes this person interesting. I'm not so much, I mean, I love the X's and O's of the game, but I wouldn't consider myself an expert on X's and O's. Like, I'm not someone who's going to break down, offensive line play in the Super Bowl this weekend. Like, for me, what's interesting are the stories, are what makes this person. I watch sports a lot with my wife, who is not a sports fan, but she loved the Indiana story because she loved Fernando Mendoza and his mom, and the family, and she loved Kurt Signetti and how quirky he was, and so I think that's been very instructive to me. Like, sports fans are going to watch no matter what, but how do you get non-sports fans to get interested? And I really believe it's storytelling, and so I think that's something that I've really had if there's one thing I'm good at, I think I've had an eye for that in my career.
Is there maybe a favorite story or favorite moment you've had over your career where you've gotten to cover something really unique that stands out to you?
I have to say, this Indiana story, I think, was the most enjoyable story I've ever covered in my career. I think it was so unlikely. I mean, if you would have told me 2 years ago when Kurt Signetti was hired that Indiana was going to go undefeated and win the national championship in football, I mean, I would have told you you're absolutely out of your mind. Like I would say the most unlikely sports story of my lifetime, domestic sports story, would be the Miracle on Ice, which I remember. I was 11 years old, and for those who don't know, it's a 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team. There was a team of amateurs. They won the gold medal, and that included beating the Russians, who were a professional team and considered the best professional team in the world. That was certainly the biggest upset. I think that one game remains the biggest upset I've ever seen in sports. But in terms of an unlikely story, like that was a 12-team hockey tournament. If you beat the Russians, you were probably going to win the tournament, right? Like this was a team that had won one conference football game the year before. They'd gone to 4 overtimes to beat Akron, and in 2 years he turns it into a national champ. So I think it's the most unlikely story I've ever covered. And then the team was just so much fun. Like the guys were just amazing to be around. Really no egos. Signetti is a quirky character, but man, he's interesting, and he'll tell you what he's thinking. And so I would say maybe there's some recency bias here, but I think that's the most enjoyable story, the best story I've ever covered.
Wow. Oh, and I bet it was so special to be there in person too. Like, what was the experience when you were on the field and interacting with the players? Would you say that there were a lot of IU fans there as well, almost more than Miami?
Well, yeah, there were definitely more Indiana fans. In fact, we were joking around that they did a song kind of like pick your favorite song that you want to hear over the loudspeaker, and one of them was a Mellencamp song, and I got 66% of the votes. So we were just like, well, obviously 66% of the people here are Indiana fans, right? Like, no Miami fan was going to pick the Mellencamp song. So yeah, I would say it's probably 2/3 IU fans in Miami's home stadium, which is pretty crazy. And yeah, it really was. I think it's interesting. I was talking to a longtime colleague who's retiring from the business, and he told me something that really resonated with me. Was he said, I was dreading going to games. Like the World Series was coming up, and part of this person's job was to cover the World Series. And he said, I wasn't really excited about it. And that told me that maybe it was time to get out, that I'd been to so many World Series and so many big events, and that maybe if you're not excited about it, then it's time to step away. And I think, I haven't had that thought yet. And I would say that this just reaffirmed how much I enjoy it. I mean, I just had such a great time covering this story. I was felt privileged to be there. And I loved being one of the people who could help convey the specialness of it. I just think I do think it's an incredible privilege. I don't doubt that there will be someday where I say, oh man, another national championship game, but it hasn't happened yet. And so this story really reaffirmed it.
I think there's a lot of people, myself included, who like you are not, journalism majors, but that's kind of what they want to go into, or where they have a passion for. Can you talk about what you did in college and just kind of that rise to ESPN and the grind it took? Because, obviously ESPN is, a place a lot of people want to get to, but not everybody does. So just kind of what did it take for you to go from, being a history major to get into ESPN?
Okay, tell me your name, by the way. I'm having trouble seeing it because I'm an old man, but your name is
Sahil.
Sahil. Okay. Okay, Sahil. So, yeah, I studied history in college, but I did do play-by-play for the radio station in Northwestern. I actually started in high school. My high school in the 1980s had a radio station and a television station. I went to Glenbrook North in Northbrook, which I'm sure there are some people who are from that neck of the woods in this group. So I kind of had always wanted to be a broadcaster. Right. I think from the very beginning, that was, if you would have asked 7-year-old Dave Revsine, what do you want to do? I would have said that. And but when I got to college, first of all, I think I wanted to. Again, I have a lot of varied interests, and I just didn't want to pigeonhole myself, and so I decided not to major in journalism and did liberal arts. instead. And kind of the thought was that I knew that I could do the radio station. I was at Northwestern. Northwestern had a great student radio station, and I had some connections there where I already knew some people, and thought, okay, well, I could do that, and that would kind of be my compromise. So I did that, and I think like the real, I don't want to say deterrent, but the moment that made me realize that, like, hey, maybe this, maybe I wasn't cut out to be a professional sports broadcaster, was the realization that at my college radio station, I will stand by this to this day, I was probably like the fifth or sixth most talented person. I mean, I really thought and there are people who have been incredibly successful who were at that station, like Jay Adonde, who you guys may know from ESPN, was there. Josh Lewin, who's a really well-known play-by-play guy. So I'm not sitting here being self-deprecating. Like, I just really thought those people were genuinely better than me. And so I think I was a realistic person. I've been realistic my whole life. And I said, well, if I'm not the best person in my own college radio station, like I probably I'm not going to be able to make a living doing this. And so, I was a good student and history major. It's like, well, what do you do with that? Well, I just took the LSAT and I did well on that. And I just thought I'd go to law school. And then I actually, through kind of a random association through a friend of my dad's, I ended up, he told me about something called the Rotary Scholarship, which was a postgraduate year. I hadn't done a year abroad, and I kind of regretted that I hadn't. And he told me about this postgraduate scholarship, and so I decided I would try to do that. I was awarded a postgraduate scholarship to go to Ireland and spent a year there. And while I was in Ireland, all of my buddies who were first-year law students were just like, dude, if you are not 100% sure that this is what you want to do, you should not do it, because it is a total grind. And so I was applying to law school. I deferred some law school admissions and just came back to Chicago and tried to find a job. I just thought, well, I'll just kind of go into the working world. And I found a job working on Wall Street, and I was miserable. I really had just a terrible year. I hated it. I wasn't interested in it. And I think I maybe unfairly equated what I was doing there with like any office job that I could possibly have, which I don't think is, in hindsight, I mean, I was young and naive and I didn't know, but I just kind of said, I don't want to be the guy who like gets on the subway and is like, cramped in, trying to read a little inch of the newspaper, rocking back and forth, like hoping that Friday afternoon I can just leave the office and no one will ask me to have a project ready for Monday so that I can actually enjoy my weekend. Like, I just wasn't interested in the job. I wasn't interested in whether the bank's clients made money or lost money or anything about it. I just kind of wanted to be left alone because I didn't like it. So, and again, so I think there probably were some business jobs out there that I would have enjoyed, but I just said to myself, you know what? I've always wanted to do this broadcasting thing, and I'm going to hate myself if I don't give it a try. And I'll forever wonder if I'm 50 years old riding the subway, still, trying to find that little area where I can, not be in someone's armpit, that I'll be wondering why didn't I try this, and I'll regret it. And so I started to aggressively look for broadcasting jobs. I actually applied to grad school in broadcasting, got admitted, thought I was going to do that. But I had a high school friend who was working in a small market in Texas, and he basically said, I think I can get you a job. And he did. He basically prevailed upon his news director to speak to me. I flew down there on my own dime. The news director literally had probably 200 tapes in his office piled up of different people who were broadcasting majors who wanted to work there. And I don't really know why he hired me. I think he just there was something about me that he thought I could do it, and he just took a flyer on me. And my buddy is an amazing guy, and I think his recommendation carried a lot of weight. And so I think it was like one of the only people ever to leave Wall Street and move to Sherman, Texas. That's what I did, and I took a job in Sherman, in a tiny market about a little over an hour north of Dallas on the Oklahoma border. And I was there for 2 years, and I learned the craft, and I wasn't very good. I made a ton of mistakes. Thankfully, it was before the internet, so those mistakes are lost to time. No one will ever see them. And then you work your way up. I got a job in the Quad Cities, which are not too far from where you guys are right now on the Illinois-Iowa border. And I was there for a year. And then ESPN was starting ESPN News, and I was just fortunate enough to be one of the people they hired.
Oh, hearing that story is it's so inspiring, and I think it's great being able to learn that just because you study a certain subject in undergrad doesn't mean that if you go out into the workforce and that's not your passion, you can't pivot as well. I think hearing about your history degree has been so interesting. Would you say that you're able to bring that into your sports broadcasting as well? In addition, like we learn more about your book, The Opening Kickoff, and the tie-in of sports and history there. So we'd love to learn more about that and how you continue to like leverage that history degree as well in the sports space.
Yeah, it's funny, Sophia. I would say that the history degree probably helped me the most with the writing component that we were talking about earlier. I I think that's how I became a good writer. I don't think I was a good writer necessarily when I got to college, but when you're a history major, you got to churn out a lot of stuff, and so I think that I kind of I understood how to punch a good line and how to tell a story coherently and economically. Economy of words, I think, helped me a lot. And then the book was really a passion for me. I would say the thing I'm proudest of in my career is the Big Ten Network and where that's gone. But I was part of a team there. That was a large group of people, and I happen to be the person that's front and center that when people turn on the network, they see. But there were countless people who played just as big, if not bigger, of a role than I did in the launch of the network. I would not say that about writing the book. That was me. so, so that just in terms of an individual accomplishment that you're really proud of, I'm really proud of it. Like I really feel like I tell this story all the time. Like I stumbled upon this story of this guy Pat O'Day, who was this great player in the 1890s at Wisconsin. I didn't know his story. I was fascinated by it. I kind of decided I wanted to figure out a way to tell it. I think originally I thought maybe it was a feature piece on the Big Ten Network or something like that. And then the more I read about him, I thought, well, maybe I would write his life story. And then as I started kind of down that path, first of all, I came to the realization there were some gaps in the story that I couldn't fill in. But I also came to understand that like what was really fascinating about Pat O'Day was that he was a lens onto this larger story, the early history of college football and why we, unique among all the countries in the world, like we're the only country that attaches this this sports enterprise to higher education. And why did that happen? I mean, when people come to the US, like, I'm sure visiting scholars at the University of Illinois, when they drive down the main drag there and they see Memorial Stadium, and if you don't know anything about college athletics, you say to yourself, why is there this 70,000 seat stadium in this small town, right? Like, how did that happen? And so that story to me is absolutely fascinating. Why did it happen here and nowhere else? And so that was the story that I strove, strive to tell, and it ended up turning into this book. And I really, again, I feel very proud of that book. Like I think it told in a narrative way, it told a story that no one had really told. I'm certainly not the first person to study this idea, but most people had studied it academically. So the books that were written about the early history of college football were very matter of fact. And so what I wanted to do was tell a story that people would, again, I don't say this with disrespect, but like that they would find pleasure in reading. And in as much as I was able to succeed in doing that, I really I feel great about it. And I think that it brought to a broader audience these ideas that again, I'm not the first person to find. Like other people had observed that early college sports was just as crazy as it is today. But to bring that to to a broader audience is something I'm really proud of.
I wanted to jump back to something you said about when you were working in Texas um for the radio station. Is that or in broadcast, is that you said you made a lot of mistakes that obviously people can't see anymore, but is there something that sticks out that you're like a mistake that you're glad you made? A lesson that you learned really early on that you think people who are trying to get into sports broadcasting should really learn early, so they don't make that mistake later in their career?
First of all, it's such a great question, Sahil. I'm smiling thinking about all of the different things that I could say. I think like the overarching thing would be I'm a perfectionist. I'm in the wrong business for that. And so I would just like somehow I've been able to get through it. But it's like that's hard, right? And when people say, "Oh, what's your biggest fault in life?" "Oh, I'm a perfectionist." Everyone knows that's a BS answer that you say, but like it really is a problem for me, and it has been something that I've worked very hard to overcome. And live television is a bad place for a perfectionist, and especially in a small market where everyone's learning, right? We were all kind of in our first job together and dependent on one another. So I'm thinking about one live shot in particular that I did like in a driving rainstorm in southern Oklahoma. And I've got an umbrella up, and the umbrella's like all over the place. Like the wind is blowing. I mean, like it's everything you would think the Great Plains would be in terms of weather. Like it's blowing wind, it's pouring rain, and I'm pulling this umbrella all over the place. And I know I'm on live television. And I know that it's just going terribly. And so what I ended up doing was I just kind of threw the umbrella aside and I said, it doesn't matter. I'll get wet, and just kind of had the rain cascade down on me. And I told the story of the game. And I think like that was a lesson early on where it was kind of embarrassing and humiliating. And the guy who was back in the studio is laughing and it ended up on our blooper reel and all those different things. But you got to roll with the punches, and I think it's kind of a metaphor for life. That if you're someone like me who's a perfectionist and control freak and all those types of things, this was a great way to realize that you weren't going to be able to control everything. And so I would say that was a big lesson that I learned. I think I learned that I didn't know everything. Again, that. It's hard to admit to yourself sometimes. I sense that probably a lot of people in your group are similar to me and my friends, which we were achievers and we were hard driving people. And you're not where you guys are. You're not where I was. If you haven't had a lot of success, and at a certain point, you have to realize, like the rest of the world knows a thing or two as well. And so I think that was like a humbling experience for me early in my career. So yeah, I mean, I think I gained a lot of self-awareness and humility, and those are still challenges. Like I do think kind of every day you have to kind of see yourself how the world sees you, and that those are lessons you can learn in any job, but I think they're particularly reinforced in a job like that one.
Wow. No, that's super helpful to hear. And would you say, like, when you're in a situation where, maybe something doesn't go as planned or you're working with other people, what does that teamwork aspect look like from the broadcasting perspective and also through your experiences, like at the Big Ten Network when you're working on a broadcasting or you're like co-speaking with someone else?
Right. So there's teamwork in a few different ways. You're right. I would say, as far as like when you're working on a team, on a production, on a show, there's so many people who are involved in putting a production on. I mean, we did a pretty bare bones operation, I would say today. Like I hosted our hour show at 11 o'clock. It's a groundbreaking show. It wasn't heavily produced, but there were probably 12 to 15 people who had a hand in that show today. That would be a rough estimate. So you're always working with a group. You're always coordinating and connecting and, discussing with one another how to approach a story and how to best tell the story of that day and what we want to get across. Working with people on the air is a totally different skill. And so my job, I feel like as a studio host, I said, I'm not the guy who breaks down offensive line play. I sit next to the people who do. And so if they have a point that they want to convey, my job is to set them up in the best way that I can. I mean, as a studio host, you're a conduit. You're someone who facilitates conversation and helps reinforce points, bring home points to the viewers, helps the person who's sitting next to you make the points that they want to make. Hey, how do you want me to set you up here? And then if you feel like maybe there's more to unearth there, you put yourself in the position of a viewer. I listen to what an analyst might be saying about a football game or a basketball game. And I say, well, hey, what would I want to know? Or maybe they use a term that I want them to clarify or to explain. So listening is listening is the cheat code in life. I mean, that's what I tell my daughters. I have 3 daughters who are roughly the age of people on this call. One is 24, and then I have twins who are juniors in college. And I say to them all the time, like, listening is where it's at. My job is, I know people look at my job as talking, but my job is really listening. It's listening to a producer, it's listening to a director, and it's listening to people that I sit next to on the set, or who I sit next to, announcing a basketball game, and hearing what they're saying and reacting to it. You can't just go out there, this is what I'm going to say, and next I'm going to say this. That's not how it works, and that's really not how life works. I mean, when you're in a meeting, I'm sure you guys have your board meetings, right, where you coordinate what you want to do with your group. I think that the biggest thing that I've learned is the best people to be with, the best people to work with, are the people who have ideas and aren't afraid to share their ideas, but also don't come in with this obstinate belief that it's their way or the highway, and want to listen to what others have to say and react to it. So, if I can leave you with one thing, ultimately, like, be a good listener. I think it gets you a long way.
I wanted to kind of switch gears just a little bit, and maybe ask you your opinion on maybe a couple sports topics that are relevant that I think everybody wants to hear about.
All right.
But where do you stand? I don't know how much you've gotten into or you've seen with the college basketball sphere with, these pro players coming back to or in some
Yeah.
cases coming back to college or trying to come back to college, or having not gone to college at all and coming, joining the NCAA after going to like the G League. Just what's your opinion on that? And do you do you see that becoming the norm? Just because with schools like Illinois, they're bringing in international pros, and I think a lot of people have the argument that that's, equivalent to somebody having been in the G League, where, a lot of people also say that's two very different things. So just what's your opinion on that broad? And that's a little broad, but that
Oh
topic.
no, it's a great question. I mean, it's incredibly topical, as you know. I'm vacillating on a lot of this stuff. So, it used to be with the European players that they could have played with pros, but they couldn't be on a pro. They couldn't be a pro themselves. So you had this kind of weird system where you would have players who were like from the junior team, and like, I'm sure Coach Underwood could explain this a lot better than I could, but who were like part of these organizations, but weren't necessarily the pros. And then at some point, we got to a point where it was okay if they had been pros internationally. And I somewhat missed the memo on that. Like, all of a sudden that happened. I was like, okay, I guess that's okay now. And so I'm with you, Sahil. I don't think you can like distinguish necessarily between like, why is it okay to make that money internationally, but it's not okay domestically? Like, I don't necessarily see the difference, but I'm like, what's going on again, like, I think like there's like what feels right to you and what feels wrong, and maybe that's not fair, but like this Alabama deal just feels wrong because it just like, I mean, this guy was like, he's a draft pick. Like, you made a decision where you said, like, I mean, okay, I'm going to go pro, right? And like at that point, I feel like you should forsake your NCAA eligibility. Again, cognizant of the fact, well, why are these guys in Europe able to say, I'm going to go pro? And I don't have a good answer for that. And so I would just say, like, the world, it's interesting because we were talking about the book earlier. And my argument, like my controlling thesis in my book was, there's nothing new under the sun. That all of the discussions that we're having today in college athletics they had in this formative period of college athletics that I studied, which was like 1890 to 1915, was kind of the focus of the story that I told. We talked about amateurism. We talked about the kind of conflict or the challenge of academics and kind of how they could coexist with athletics. We talked about the mass media and the rise of that, like all of these different issues. Injuries were a huge issue, and kind of the concussion crisis that we've gone through. There's a antecedent to that I discussed, and so all of these issues have been out there. So amateurism has been a moving target for 150 years. Like, take my word for it. I studied it, and I think that we have this tendency to draw these arbitrary lines in the sand and to say, okay, like I want to define amateurism as it is in 2005. And so whenever the EA Sports case came out, the Ed O'Bannon case, that, hey, that's me on the video game, I should be paid for that. But we had a line in the sand at whatever year that was. I think it was somewhere around that time, 2005, 2010. No, you can't be paid for that. You can't be paid for your what is now considered name, image, and likeness. And so we let it go to the courts. And of course, they lost. And so had they said at that time, let's come up with something reasonable. Let's say that everyone who's on that video game gets $1,000 or whatever it is. I think kids would have been happy with that. And I think that would have been fair. What a different world we might be living in had that happened. But I also think that what is fair is universities are profiting immensely from student athletes. So I am perfectly comfortable, and have been for quite some time, with the revenue share, with this notion that, now it's about $21 million of that revenue should go to student athletes. I'm comfortable with the notion that if you are a student athlete who has genuine value, Caitlin Clark would be a great example. State Farm wanted her on commercials while she was still in college. Drew Aller was on that Venmo commercial, right? I mean, you can kind of go down that Arch Manning was on commercials. So if those people have value, I think they ought to be able to realize that. I'm not comfortable with just, what would be called like fake NIL, which is just like people just saying, I think, we ought to go out and pay $8 million to this guy to play quarterback, not because he has $8 million in NIL value, because, State Farm or Vuori or whoever would pay him $8 million, but just because I have $8 million lying around and I want School X to get this quarterback. To me, that's think about the NFL if we had unlimited free agency and no salary cap, right? I mean, that's essentially what this is. But again, this is kind of where we are, and so what's going on with these pros, is that any different? Like, I don't know. It somehow feels wrong, but I'm perfectly comfortable with the argument that, hey, it's within the rules. Like, these are the rules right now, and what's going on there is supposedly in the rules. Although we're getting temporary restraining orders from favorable judges who happen to sit in the first row for the game. I mean, is it really within the rules? Again, everything that's going on is so that we're dealing with degrees of minutia and arcane. I can just tell you that doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't feel right to me that someone should be able to join a team mid-season. Like, to me, if you're going to play college athletics in the 2005 or 25, 26 season, you should be enrolled in that college at the beginning of 2025. I don't think that is unreasonable to say that should be the rule. But we have to make rules that everyone can agree on. And unfortunately, it feels like the horse is out of the barn and running free across the pasture. And it's kind of too late. And so I don't blame kids for saying, hey, if this European kid is coming over, I played in the G League, what's the difference? I don't blame them for saying that. That's a very long answer.
No, I mean, I think I'm with you on most of that. It's just every you can't blame the people for taking advantage of a system that other
Unfold.
people are going to take advantage. That's how you have to stay competitive these days. If somebody's going to do it, how do you stay competitive is by doing it as well.
100%. Yes.
Yeah. Sophia, unless you had any other additional questions, I wanted to open it up
Yeah, I think that's
to everybody
perfect.
here.
Hmm.
Yeah, so if any of you guys have a question for Dave, just raise your hand or unmute and we'll open it up to you guys.
And say your name if you could, just because again my eyes are really bad and my screen. Your name is really tiny.
Hi Dave, how you doing?
Good. What's going on?
I'm Hayden. So, my question was, you mentioned how you think it'd be fair to do some kind of revenue sharing split with athletes. How are you, if you were going to define it, like how would you find that fair? Do they get some kind of percentage that's into their contract? How do we make sure that the universities make sure like they're just not giving them money to play for them?
Well, I mean that's what's happening right now, right? So you have, each school has about $21 million in revenue share, which is from marketing, it's from television rights, ticket sales. So this has started. This is the first full year of that, and they can allocate it however they want. You can choose not to opt in to revenue share. I mean, there are schools for whom athletics is a losing enterprise. Smaller Division I schools, they can have no rev share money. You're not obligated to do it, but the schools have up to $21 million to spend however they want to spend it on for student athletes. And that to me, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood. I think of like 20 to 25% of where the average revenue is for the power conference schools. And so that to me feels about right. I mean, again, now you could say, well, hey, why isn't it more? Maybe they should stop building facilities. And the crazy thing is, if you go to an NFL facility, it's nowhere near as nice as what colleges have. The college training facilities are much nicer, just because the NFL puts more money into salaries, and historically the colleges couldn't put money into salaries, and so they just kind of tried to keep outdoing each other with, or could put money into salary, I should say, and so they put money into facilities. So you could say maybe stop doing that, or maybe pay, have fewer staff members or whatever it is you want to do. But right now, it feels like that money's about right. And to me, it's 14 or 15 million dollars for a football team of 85 scholarship guys. You could do the math. That feels about right. I mean, I don't think that people should be in a position where you say it is far more lucrative to me to participate in college athletics than professional athletics, right? Like, I think that college athletes should get a share of this, should get a fair share of this. I think it's crazy that they haven't to this point. But again, like if kids are saying, or young people are saying, I'm better off in college. If you're better off in college, if you're going to be a sixth round pick, okay, that's fine. Like that might make sense, right? Because there could be huge value in a quarterback who would be a sixth round pick, and you say, but if you're better off in college than if you're going to be a first round pick, I don't know. That to me seems a little backwards.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure, Hayden.
I had a question.
Yeah. What's your
Hi,
name?
Brian. Name is
Hi, Brian.
Thank you for taking time out of your evening to come speak with us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
When you were talking and discussing the NIL scene dynamic now, you kind of likened it to like a situation where essentially there is no salary cap.
Yeah.
And obviously that has like effects on like parity and competition. So my question to you is, especially considering that NIL essentially comes from like a students first sort of thing, how important do you think parity is in the collegiate scene, considering that?
Define what you mean by students first, Brian. What do you mean by that?
Well, perhaps it's an opinion, but to my understanding, NIL is basically it came into an existence from an argument um, for students getting compensated for their names as their own brands rather than
Yeah.
just all the funds and profits, if you will, going to the university.
So I think it's important to define what NIL means and what it's kind of become. So NIL means name, image, and likeness. So can you profit from your name, image, and likeness? I 100% believe you ought to be able to do that, and have believed this forever. I mean, there was a skier, a competitive skier named Jeremy Bloom, who was a skier, who was also a football player for Colorado, and he had all these endorsements because he was a really good skier. And this was like 20 years ago. And the NCAA, it may have been longer, it may have been 25 years ago. And the NCAA said he couldn't participate because he had made money off endorsements. And I was just like, well, that's ludicrous. Like, why can't he participate, right? So if you have value in your brand, again, I would use the example of Caitlin Clark or Drew Aller, or if the local Chevy dealer in Champaign says, hey, I want Keith Wagler to be my spokesperson for my Chevy dealership. I think we can say, okay, well, like, what's the going rate for the spokesperson for the Chevy dealership in Champaign? Like, what do you make to do a commercial for them? And that Keith Wagler should be able to do that. Or, why Champaign? What if it's Chicago? Wherever. He should be able to do whatever it is that a company says, this is true market value for him to do that. I think what NIL has become is it's just people's boosters just saying, hey, I got all this money lying around and I want our team to be better. And so here's this money. And again, I would just say, like, we wouldn't allow that in professional sports. Like, this guy is the big Texas Tech booster, who's the oil guy. If he said, well, I want to do the same with the Dallas Cowboys, I'm just going to give, the Cowboys an extra $100 million to spend every year. We'd say, well, no, you can't do that because there are rules in place. There's a salary cap. So that's it. But, if a member of the Cowboys is asked to do an advertisement or is the biggest thing on Instagram, it gets money for every post or whatever it would be, absolutely knock yourself out. And so that to me does that make sense? Like, that's what I would distinguish it as. Like, I just don't think it should be people who are just, kind of to your point of competitive balance. I think there's always going to be haves and have-nots in any enterprise. There are large market teams and small market teams, right? Like, I'm a White Sox fan. They're in a large market, but they operate like a small market team, right? Like, they're not going to have the same payroll that the Dodgers and the Yankees do. And that's just a bummer. That's the way it's always been. And so I'm not sitting here saying that we're going to have perfect equality. We're just not. There are going to be some programs that are always going to have more resources, more access to players, whatever it might be. But I just think that NIL ought to really be NIL. I don't think it ought to just be the guy, the oil baron writing a check. That's just my opinion. And again, right now it's the oil baron writing the check, and it may continue to be that. And that's fine. I mean, if that's what we agree on as an enterprise, but that's not really what NIL is. Does that make sense?
Yep, I actually agree. Thank you.
Jack, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Dave. My name is Jack. You talked a little bit about Indiana going from nothing to something. I just want to get your opinion on Keen Wagler's ascension from unheralded prospect to my maybe a little bit biased opinion, but Big Ten Freshman of the Year.
I think he might be Big Ten Player of the Year. I mean, I think he's in that conversation, Jack. I think he's been amazing. It's a great story. I was talking to Ben Johnson, who was the Minnesota coach. He unfortunately was let go last year, but someone I've gotten to know and covering him. And he was the only other high major offer that Keaton Wagler had. So he had watched, Keaton for a while and was just hoping no one else discovered him because he wasn't on this major. He didn't play for one of the big time, the shoe teams, these AAU gyms where, like the biggest, the best players play on. And was loyal to his buddies. And so, he was kind of undiscovered, and Ben found him. And then I think Brad found him. They were scouting another player, I think, is what Underwood said. And they saw him and were blown away by him. So I think it's an amazing story. It's the year of the freshman in college basketball. It's incredible how many really great players there are. And for him to be among them, I think it's great. Like all these other guys, AJ DeBond said all these, these were guys who everyone knew about. Everyone knew, hey, this is going to be a superstar, Cam Boozer, whoever it is. And I think what's been really amazing about Wagler's story is just, he wasn't even the most highly touted freshman in Illinois. Like, I don't even think close, frankly. So that's the part of it that I think it's really cool. And I just love how unfazed he seems to be by all of it. I mean, he is so steady. The performance at Mackey was absurd. But I thought he was almost as good against Nebraska the other day. And again, these are supercharged environments. And I think when you think about going from playing in a high school gym in Kansas to playing at Mackey and playing at Pinnacle Bank and to be totally unfazed by it, I think it's a remarkable story.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Okay, we probably have time for about one more question.
Hey Dave, I'm Ethan. You talked about NIL and how like G League players are coming back to college basketball now. I was wondering what your opinion was on the current state of like the transfer portal and all of that in college athletics nowadays.
Well, again, these are hot button issues, Ethan, and I would never stand in the way of someone saying they want to transfer. And I do think it was somewhat archaic to say that you had to sit out a year, which was the rule forever. And we had a rule in the Big Ten for many years you couldn't transfer from one Big Ten school to another. Again, like the degree to which this has changed in the last 5 years outstrips any changes that we had probably in the previous 50 years combined, all of this stuff. I don't think it's great for students to transfer 3 or 4 times. I think one of the real challenges in talking to people in athletics is that often credits don't transfer. So you might get credits at one school and another school will say, well, we don't have a course like that, or we don't approve of that course. And kids might fall behind and not get their degree. And I'm just old-fashioned enough to believe that this is still an academic enterprise, and that the real value of what college athletics gives people is a degree. Again, I realize there is a ton of money in it now, and so I think it'd be foolish to say, you should stay there just to get your degree when someone else is dangling more money. I get it, like especially players who this might be their only time to make money. They may not be a pro. I think it's fair, again, like if you transfer once, I think multiple transfers are, again, I'm just not sure that's great for a young person. And, maybe at that point, do you sit out a year? I don't know. Again, I would love to see some of the studies of kind of what happens to kids who transfer 3 or 4 times. Are they getting their degree? I just work with people for whom college athletics changed their life. Howard Griffith, who I've worked with, who's an Illinois grad, a really proud Illinois grad. Howard would tell you, and Jerry DiNardo would say the same thing. These are the 2 guys I've worked with the longest. Jerry will tell you he was not ordinarily admissible to Notre Dame, and he got in because of football. But he was capable of taking advantage of what Notre Dame had to offer. And Howard would tell you the same thing about Illinois. He was not ordinarily admissible to Illinois, but getting a degree from Illinois changed his life. And he wasn't ordinarily admissible, Frank, for both of them. They just say, well, they like slacked off in high school and they didn't, they were jocks and they didn't care. Like they're 2 of the smartest people I've ever been around. Right. And that even reinforces the notion to me that college tapped into that and helped them understand, like, hey man, like this can take me places. This degree can take me places. And Howard ended up playing in the NFL for 10 years and scored 2 touchdowns in the Super Bowl. And maybe he didn't really necessarily need that degree until 10 or 12 years later, when all of a sudden, the Big Ten Network opportunity comes around. But he'll tell you it helped him. He'll tell you it changed his life. And Jerry would say the same thing. Jerry ended up as a coach, You know, do you need a degree from Notre Dame to be a coach? Maybe not, but it changed his life. And so I believe in education. Like, I think that education is valuable. And you guys know, like, think about all the sacrifices that you made to get to U of I, right? And think about, like, you know, you need a certain SAT score to get in there, not because you need that SAT score necessarily to do the work, but because so many people want to go there, they need to figure out a way to sort people out. And so that's the way that they've decided to do it. And every school's like that. And so there's value in that degree, and getting access to that degree and getting access to the knowledge. And so I guess it's, again, a very long way of saying, I hope we don't lose the enterprise in the portal. Like, the enterprise should still be about education. And I get it. Like, if someone is dangling $2 million in front of you, should you be able to go after that? Yes, you should be able to go after that. I'm not trying to stand in someone's way. I'm just saying, I hope that in all of this, most of these kids aren't making life-altering money. Most of them aren't. And I hope that we don't, in an effort to chase an extra $50,000, you don't lose that degree, which conservatively, a college degree, the research I've seen, gets you about an extra $1 million over the course of your career, conservatively. So let's not lose sight of that in the short term. Let's not lose sight of that long-term value.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, Dave, thank you so much. This truly has been incredible. We can't thank you enough. If it's okay, we'd love to get a group photo.
Okay.
I'll just use my phone to take a picture of us. But
All right.
okay, let's see. Well, everyone smile on the Zoom for the photo.
Do you want me to
Okay, awesome.
you in it?
Oh, we're good. Thank you. Okay, yes. Well, this has been so inspiring. Just, we're all such big Big Ten Network fans. So being able to connect with you here and like have this conversation has been so great. So thank you so much. This has been wonderful for ISBC, and we're just so grateful for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was really fun to talk to all of you. I have a real soft spot for the U of I. My dad was a professor there for a time. I was born in Urbana, and so a lot of connections there, a lot of family who's gone there. So, you know, happy to talk to any group of young people, but especially a group of Illinois students. So thanks a lot. Really appreciate you, and appreciated what great questions y'all asked. They were fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, come on, round of applause. Yeah,
yes, let's all give Dave a big virtual round of applause here. Yes, I echo everything that Sophia said. I think I really should have prefaced the start of the call with this, but ultimately one of our main goals at ISBC, Dave, is to make our members more prepared for a career in sports business. So the more extremely successful individuals that we can interact with from the sports business world, the more prepared we're going to be, and the better off we're going to be in the long run as well. So we really appreciate your time, and hopefully we can have you down here as a speaker at a future conference as well. So we look forward to keeping in touch.
That sounds great. Thanks to all of you, and have a great week, everyone.
All right. Terrific. Thank you so much.